Leading up to May 22nd, 2023, the day of the trademark reveal for the name Kamen Rider Gotchard, there were already plenty of rumors circulating, stating that the upcoming season after Kamen Rider Gotchard will be something like Yu-Gi-Oh! For Kamen Rider. So the new name appearing to be a combination of the words gacha and card just strengthened those. Rumors that came out afterwards said his base form would be blue and made up from a pair of cards called Water, Ocean, and Mechanical Wind. In June, we got a mock-up of the belt and the first rumblings of an enhancement trigger that would go on the top of the belt for an upgrade form. New descriptions also said that the belt was orange and that the cards it used had a rarity system, with the two being used for the base form being super rares that created a base form for the rider that looked like a grasshopper and steam train form inspired by the original Kamen Rider with arrow eyes and goggles. A few mock-ups were made based on these descriptions, but eventually the real thing was leaked on June 28th, alongside a couple of the gimmicks and equipment that he used. Going into July, a new trademark leaked the logo of the season, but like we already seen the rider's base form by this point, alongside rumors of a new arrow weapon, the name Ride Kemi trading card, which would be sold in booster packs, and Riku Sanjo was rumored as the rider. The secondary rider was said to be using a wrench gun and would function as a rival character, while the tertiary was said to be based on Kamen Rider Decade and would use a single card played by the original Decade actor. There were swirling rumors as well of a Geats card appearing in the summer movie for Gotchard, which was compounded by a factory leak of a raised buckle with room for a Ride Kemi card appearing alongside a bunch of Gotchard drivers, which also seemingly confirmed the previous leak of the suit for those that were still unconvinced. On July 20th, almost a month since the leak, Toei officially announced Kamen Rider Gotchard, releasing a poster, the production crew, writers, and name-dropping Ichinose Hotaro, the high school alchemist trying to capture 101 Kemis that turned into Malgums. New reveals included the other cards and videos and the Rider card website, a teaser trailer which showed off valvarad for the first time, and Gotchard's cameo in the Geats movie leaked online. Many speculated that the Mad Pirates Wild was his civilian form for some reason, but we did get our first look at the Wilds thanks to this cameo. At the press conference in August, the trailer showed off the entire starting cast, such as the villains and the rest of the Alchemy Academy students, and it revealed the theme song would be made by Back On and receive an update in 2024. Additional rumors surfaced by this time for Super Gotchard, the first big upgrade said to use UFO and T-Rex cards with a sword attachment on the belt, while Kamen Rider Legend was the name of the Decade lookalike who used Legend cards, but probably wasn't Decade's actor, but was said to be the show's tertiary rider. The names of the first 100 Kemis were leaked early thanks to the lottery releases of the Gotchard driver, some of which were slowly starting to be revealed leading up to the finale of Kamen Rider Gotchard, which marked the television debut of Hotaro and Hopper 1 week before Kamen Rider Gotchard began airing on September 3rd, 2023. If you remember in my Kamen Rider Gotchard review last year, I said I hope that future Kamen Rider seasons would start splitting themselves up in more unique ways like that show did, and Gotchard kind of fulfills that for me. The first part of the show is the introductory Kemi collection arc, then we escalate that to a level 10 arc that ends with the movie, and then we get a big Rion arc that has little segments like the Daybreak and Platinum Gotchard and Rider debut arcs, a Legend arc, there's a Rainbow Gotchard arc, and then like the last stretch of the show. Obviously they're not like definitive resets each time, but the show being structured like this kind of creates a uniquely consistent tone, because we start off lighthearted and cutesy, then we kind of shift into high gear with Dread and the level X's, then we kind of dial it back a little bit, but we're still in high gear because now Grion's around, and once we get rid of Grion, we kind of dial back all the way for a few episodes and go back to normal Kemi collecting, which is honestly really fun. It didn't feel like jarring tonal shifts. I thought there was a great balance because I was worried initially how fast they would try to shove the 101 Kemi collection at us, but because of this constant switching and balancing, I was pretty satisfied with how they were distributed throughout the show. I mean, we literally get standard Monster of the Week and Chemi Collection plotlines from the first few episodes appearing past the halfway mark and near the end of the show, which feels like an oddity in Modern Rider, but Gotchard's tone fits so well with this, and it just makes it all feel like a complete package. Like, for the stretch of time we don't have a big main boss, we can go back to just little shenanigans going out and grabbing the chemis wherever they are in this weird world. Like, a lot of the main forms we get in the beginning are used by Hotaro for actual forms and wilds. Then when we start to introduce the ancient and occult chemis, we use the level X's as the main kind of signature forms for those categories as we start collecting those other ones. And then the Fantastic Cosmics are represented by Vina almost exclusively, and then Spanner is just kind of gets the scraps, I guess. In a lot of ways, Gotchard feels like a classic Heisei Phase 2 season intermingled with modern Reiwa elements. I think it's so cool that we've gone back to a consistent trio of main riders, but we of course get plenty of other riders. Again, it's a Reiwa show, we have to push all these premium Bandai belts, but they're not active in the same way that Gotchard, Majade, and Valvarad are. Legend and Daybreak and Wind are more or less guest appearance riders. Dread doesn't belong to one character then, and he gets passed around as a consistent antagonist. And like, the Dread, Kamen Rider Dread suit is consistently a bad guy. We never really get a full-on redemption. We never see it fight alongside the heroes as like a full-on good guy. Of course, I love seasons with too many riders. Once again, Geats is one of my favorite seasons, but it was quite refreshing to get a season that goes almost an entire quarter with only one definitive Kamen Rider, and after that, any extra Kamen Riders we get, besides the main trio, are in these different roles. I mean, in the beginning, we technically have valvarad there as another suited character, but he's not a Kamen Rider in name yet, and they actually place emphasis on the name Kamen Rider, like what it means to be the Kamen Rider of this world, and that's really cool. That also applies to the many non-Rider cast members that we got, which is also quite fun for me. I don't want to act like the big reason I enjoyed Gotchard is because it did a bunch of things that Kamen Rider has been shying away from recently. It's sure, it is a bit of a significant portion, but I did have fun with the way the show presented itself and how the characters behaved throughout it. Like, because of the alchemy theme, the side characters pretty frequently get to participate in the action as civilians, which is awesome. I enjoyed that all of them get some kind of focus episode or arc or moment throughout, like Minato temporarily being Dread, or Kyoka being a mentor after she's introduced and Minato goes to the bad guy side. And Sabi and Renge are pretty much like, I mean, the secondary supporting characters. Like, they're helping out or doing something in nearly every episode, and I think they're two really fun characters. Like, you don't need to focus on them a lot, but having them there, they're like spice characters. Having them there spices everything up, essentially. And even Kajiki gets like a little arc after he's being like a joke character in nearly every other arc. It helped the world feel lived in because this large cast of non-Rider characters each has their own backstories or ideals that we focus on, even for just a little bit. Now, I will say that one of my biggest problems with Gotchard is that the world doesn't sometimes feel as lived in as it should be. The world of alchemy outside of the academy feels very underdeveloped to me. We don't need to see like other alchemists all the time. And I get that they're probably trying to say like these are the only students in this one school, or maybe the only school that exists, I don't know. There's like those three hooded guys that control everything, and they only pop in when they need to exposit dialogue or something like that. And then there's that random group of adults we only seen the final episodes. In both cases just feel random. Like, there's this whole world of alchemy out there, but we only see them when it's plot relevant. We're only focusing in on this one small part ever, and it just kind of makes the world feel smaller. Like, once Hotaro becomes a big A-ranked alchemist, what does he do? Like, what do the A-ranked alchemists do? Do they all go and become teachers like Minato? Are they... I don't know. The rules of this world aren't really established that well. And the school aspect even, I don't feel is super prominent. Like, there's not really much alchemy. Like, we don't see Hotaro being taught alchemy that much. He just kind of gets it with Rainbow Gotchard, which, like, I understand you don't want to pause episodes and have Hotaro, like, here's the alchemy I learned in this episode. But, I don't know, the idea of these students learning alchemy kind of drops off, and even the idea of Hotaro and Rine being students kind of drops off, in my opinion. Like, after they defeat Grion and they're able to return to the academy, like, there's never this kind of, oh yeah, they're being taught alchemy again or something like that. Like, and then throughout that, like, there's a few moments of them in school. I just kind of wish that the high schooler aspect was more fleshed out in terms of alchemy and normal high school students, just because that was kind of like a big part of the show, I felt, but it doesn't really feel like it sometimes. And then the biggest, worst part of lore, in my opinion, is Fuga, Rina's dad, because he's like the most important character to the show's lore. He's the one that had the chemis for 10 years, he gave the Gotchard driver to Hotaro, and yet he comes back in the middle of the show and, like, they're just like, Fuga, you're back. Okay, let's move on. Like, they don't really emphasize any of that. There's no, like, big lore dump from him or something, which is, you know, I feel kind of necessary with a character like that. Then he dies and he comes back again, and then he just sits off screen for, like, most of the last few episodes after he comes back. It's so weird. And then on top of that, he's also, like, incredibly important to Rina's character. Like, in the very first episodes, we established that she's sad about him being dead, and then he comes back. It's her first time seeing him in 10 years, and she thought he was dead, and they share a quick hug, and that's it. Then we move on, and then he dies because he's just a clone, and then he comes back, and then, like, they do the exact same scene, and then again he goes off to sleep, and it's just so weird. Like, I don't understand what they were trying to do with this character. It's like, it feels like he should be very important, even if he's not actively fighting or anything. Like, he should be in every episode after he comes back, right? But he's not. And that's kind of my other big problem with Gotchard, which is that it feels like it's doing too much. Let's look at the Abyssalist Sisters, for example. I think they start off as an incredible villain group. I love how often they interact with the heroes, how they're turning into monsters of the week and getting in on the fight scenes like that. Lachesis' redemption feels very kind of half-assed. Like, I understand her switch to the hero side, but then they kind of just accept her very easily. I love that she transforms into valvarad. I really like the episode that she does it in. I think it works well there. But then she just kind of ends up becoming a background character. She's not fighting as valvarad actively after that. And the whole human plotline is just kind of a background thing that does also feel like it's taking away from other things. Like, I feel like after you have her transform into valvarad, at least have, like, some kind of friction with her and Spanner or something like that, given that they're both valvarad now. Clotho's relationship with her sisters does stay consistent, but they set up some kind of ideas with her and Hotaro, but then it also doesn't really go anywhere, so it also kind of feels a bit unearned. And then I actually don't really have any complaints about Atropos, because they like, everything with her I think works pretty well, and I personally thought the storyline with Rina was pretty satisfying. So she's probably the best of the three, which is unfortunate because I feel like the other two had a lot going for them. Gigist, I thought he was cool. Like, he starts off as such a cool antagonist, the Abyssalist King, the thing that ate Grion, but not really, as we learned. But still, he made the chemis. He's turning chemis into amalgams on their own. Like, it's such a crazy switch up. And then after he's defeated, he just disappears. Literally, he's not in multiple episodes. And then he just comes back in the one Spanner final form debut episode and just gets defeated by Spanner's final form kind of unceremoniously, in my opinion. Like, he doesn't really do anything to warrant that kind of, like, gravitas with the final form in that one. And it's so disappointing because he's the creator of the chemis. He's, like, could only have been defeated by Hotaro's final form, all 100 chemis. and they introduced this aspect about him and Spanner sharing this flame ability, but there's no rivalry or alliance formed between them. It's just dialogue to pad time, really. And that's because he has to balance it out with like 3 other main villains in the last 10 episodes. The 2 other Abyssalist Kings, I actually don't mind them. I actually think Galeria is pretty cool. I like how she reintroduces a lot of the early story elements and kind of causes everything crumbling down. Like, I think she's a really effective villain. I liked Germa, but he's in 1.5 episodes, and I think he could have been like the final boss. Grion starts off as a cool villain. I think he's a perfect villain for the first half of the show. He's so despicably evil. He's a perfect foil for our main trio. He really ups the stakes and all of that. And then when they reveal his goal is just to make everything gold, it is stupid, but then they defeat him right after that. So it is kind of like, oh, okay, like, you know, his goal was stupid, but now he's gone. But then when he's brought back as the big bad final antagonist, now his big stupid goal to make everything gold is like, okay, I don't really care. Like, it's super weird and dragged out as a final boss plotline. It's just annoying when we had 3 other guys that were pretty cool, and it kind of feels like we dragged them all down to raise up a guy that isn't really necessary in this portion of the show anymore. And then the most egregious for me is that the 2 main riders don't feel like they get a lot of focus either. The other 2 main riders, besides Hotaro. Spanner, for example, has an incredible debut as a Kamen Rider. It's one of my favorite mini arcs in the show, and really made me like his character, because I wasn't really loving him before that. But after he becomes a rider, he does not have a single meaningful interaction with Hotaro until the final few episodes. And it's like the show set up the distinction between Hotaro being the Kamen Rider and Spanner just being valvarad. And after he becomes Kamen Rider Valvarad, there's no indication like he gains more respect for Hotaro's or his ideals, or like any, like, the dynamic does not shift now that he becomes a Kamen Rider. It's just an upgrade for Spanner, the Valvarad character, really. Like, I don't know, that's kind of disappointing. And then for Rine, it doesn't feel as bad in some ways, because, like, again, she kind of has the consistent Atropos plotline, where I feel like Spanner gets nothing. But that Atropos plotline does kind of always get regulated to the background until Twilight's debut. She doesn't really have anything big that's ever happening for herself. There's a Romeo and Juliet arc, but that's kind of it. And we also don't really know, like, how she really feels about working with chemis, which I feel like is a pretty important thing, because we have Hotaro, like, oh, they're all our friends. Spanner uses them as tools and they follow him. Rine just has chemis. Like, we don't, for lack of a better term, we don't know her gotcha. And also there's that really stupid thing with her ring always needing to recharge, and every time it happens, it just feels like, oh, okay, they don't want her to transform in this episode. And it's so weird, because no other character has to do that. It's just her. And it's such a weird thing to introduce about the first ever female secondary rider, which, like, I think that's cool. I'm happy for her. I'm glad we've finally gotten a female secondary rider. It's not like she's a horrible character. I feel like all of this would just happen regardless of the character's gender. It's just kind of a disappointing first outing that all of this happens to happen with the first ever female secondary rider. Of course, I know Rina and Spanner were never going to get as much focus as Hotaro, because the show is called Kamen Rider Gotchard, but they also don't get like a proportional amount of focus to at least match up with him somehow. Like, the ending fights are Hotaro in his big powerful final form, and the other 2 are just in base forms. Like, their final forms are their only upgrades regulated to the last 3 episodes of the show, which is kind of a point in time where we should be leaving behind individual focus and start kind of just dealing with the plot and everyone trying to defeat the bad guys. I know that, like, having the amount of toys you get isn't indicative of a character's focus in the writing, but it also does kind of say something if your secondary rider is not getting anything beyond a single form change. Spanner even has 2, so Rina just kind of has nothing, which is just weird. And again, it's because it kind of feels like there's too much going on. Instead of giving extra character arcs and forms for Spanner and Rina, or, you know, using Fuga's character in some way, we get a Renge Focus 2-parter, or a Zukumpire 2-parter, or a Sabi and Kajiki 2-parter, each in the last 10 episodes. And while I liked having little focus episodes like this, and I liked learning more about Sabi and Renge and giving Kajiki his own storyline, is it really necessary to make them 2-parters if they're not contributing much for our main characters? And the big one that many argue about, I've seen, is the Legend crossover arc, because that's like 4 total episodes. That kind of starts with the Kashins arriving with Bune Violet, and then Legend's whole arrival and Legend Riders and all of this and that. I personally would disagree. Granted, do I think they should have dedicated that much time to a crossover, basically? Probably not. But like, it starts off with like Kroto focus episode, and it's all used to set up the Gigist as a threat without having him explicitly fighting on the field. So once he actually starts kicking ass, we already know what kind of a threat he is, and I think it leads beautifully into the Rainbow Gotchard debut. But I also must admit, I am a little biased because I think Kaguya is probably my favorite Gotchard rider. I just think he's cool, and I enjoyed those episodes. I think it was cool how they brought back these old suits, and how they, like, especially the first real episode with Legend was like a beautifully crafted episode. The way it ties Gotchard stuff and Legend stuff all together. Probably one of my favorite episodes of the show. So it's like, is Gotchard doing too much? Because it has all these other little things that it's doing while trying to give an adequate amount of focus to our main characters, one of which is only here for like a few episodes, and then kind of by the end of things, it sort of sometimes feels like it's not accomplishing anything, which is ironic considering the low stakes plot lines that the show mostly ends up having, which I will admit is a big part of why I enjoyed Gotchard. Since the first few episodes, it was clearly this kind of sit back and relax Kamen Rider season, watching this younger generation navigate the realities of the larger world, and that's the way I kind of viewed the whole thing. Like, Hotaro is not a groundbreaking or even particularly compelling protagonist, but I liked seeing his defiance in the face of all these adults telling him he can't accomplish his gotcha. Even at his lowest point, he still manages to see the rainbow in the darkness and gets rewarded with one of my favorite final forms and one of my favorite final form debut episodes. I love his camaraderie with Rina. Overall, I do like Rina's development. I think she is a cool character for the most part. And I really like Spanner's character a lot too. Besides Kaguya, I do think he might be my favorite character just from his rider debut alone. Like, I like these characters. I like the overall structure. I also like the toys a lot because I have all of the 100 chemis. I'm just going to show you guys all my chemis, first of all. And then even I got the movie ones too, which you wouldn't have seen if you've been checking out my unboxing. So you would know most of this, but you wouldn't know all of this. It's weird because I wouldn't say Gotchard's top tier Kamen Rider for me personally, but by no means do I think it's bad. I mean, it's pretty much just in the middle, maybe even like a little higher in good category. It's a pretty fun season of Kamen Rider, and I see why so many people like it. Let me know in the comment section, did you love it more than I did? Did you hate it more than I did? Also, make sure to subscribe to the channel because I will be talking about Kamen Rider Gavu next week or this week, depending on how time works, or I've already done it. So make sure you check out my Patreon for early sneak peeks at that as well, and all of my future Kamen Rider videos, Gotchard, Gavu, and anything else. And I hope to see you next Gachanko.